Hey, this is Brian Hagney, Assistant Professor of Game Design, and we are going to make a glowing, whatever this is called, obelisk, using Blender, using Substance Painter, and using Unreal Engine. And it's not only going to glow, but it's going to, like, pulse glow. Let's talk about a few things that we didn't get to talk about in class. This is just an array that I made. I beveled an object. I just made a block. I rotated it to fit on this thing, and then I added a bevel to it. And of course, I made sure to apply scale and so that it would be proper. And then I arrayed it, and I arrayed it in the Z, about 1.5, so it goes upwards, right? Now, I want to talk about a couple things. Number one, if I ever want to move this up and down, because I rotated it, let me look in the side view, because I rotated it so nicely, if I were to just by default tap G and Z to move this, it moves up and down in the world axis. I'm going to hit escape. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is change that axis from global to local, or coordinates, I guess you could call them. There's local coordinates, global coordinates. They call them transform orientations here. So if I set this to local and I tap G and Z, it remembers the up and downness of that actual object. And so the cool thing about that is tap G, Z, I can make sure that if it's rotated on a slant, it continues along that slant. Okay. The next thing I want to point out is, well, let me go ahead and mirror this, right? So if I have my world origin, or my cursor at the world origin, and I right click and set my origin to the 3D cursor, and I use the mirror modifier, right? It is going to be a little bonky because it's mirroring along its axis. You might think you want to Control A and apply rotation. I don't like doing that though, because now I just screwed up my array and things like that. So Control Z, instead of applying that rotation, we are instead going to use the obelisk itself as the mirror. And if that didn't work, we would create an empty to mirror across, just so that it's not using its own locally rotated axis. Okay. The other thing that I want to point out is I do not like how the obelisk is angled, but my little things here are not angled. And let me actually move these G, Z, so that they're centered. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I can just twist them, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a modifier. I'm going to add the simple deform. Remember, simple deform had twist, bend, but it also had taper. Let's see how it's doing this. I'm not really loving that. Well, let's check it out. We're going to taper it along the Z axis, right? And right now it's using that taper on the mirror, so I'm going to drag the simple deform above. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, there we go. That is odd. This didn't happen to me a second ago, so let me figure out why tapering is doing that. Oh, I know why. Because its origin point is down here now. I didn't mean to do that, so let me right-click and set the origin point to... Set origin point to geometry. There we go. Now that it's at the center of this one object, right, we can now drag the factor. Let me look at it in the front view. Now we can change this like that, and now we can turn the mirror on, and it's going to do the exact same thing. That way it looks a little bit nicer. Now if I want to have this as a separate component, we are going to want to... or something we can add a material onto. We will want to add a material here, and I'm going to call this, steel. Okay, my other materials right now are glow, obelisk, and now I have steel. I'm fine that that's white. That's going to be perfectly acceptable. This is now part of my high poly. In class, I just left it as is. I might as well see if I can shift click it and Control plus to see if we can add that. And in order to see that material there on our High poly, we do need to add another slot, and we do need to add steel. And that should have added the steel. Okay. So again, that's another technique you could do. Does it matter when you add on if it's using the Boolean or not? I don't think so. Okay, so let's just export this as the high poly. And that's from Blender. So let's do this, obby HP. I'm probably going to make a second one, so I'm going to call this obby2 HP. obby02 underscore HP. Make sure it's limited to selection. There we go. Now I do have my, oops, I'm going to remake the low poly, and I'm just doing that by Shift D, duplicating, right clicking, renaming this obby LP. And I'm going down and getting rid of all of these booleans and things that I don't really need. I do want my subdivision surface. What is this? That's intriguing. Uh-oh. Did I do the wrong one? No. Let's grab the high poly and remove it, or hide it. And then I'm going to just quickly, I might as well keep this running. I'm just going to shift click, shift click, shift click, shift click. Oops, I'm actually not shift clicking. I'm shift alt clicking. So alt click, shift alt click, shift alt click, shift alt click. I might as well right click and make those seams just in case. Mark those as seams. Alt click, alt shift click, alt shift click. I don't care if there's a little flap there. That might be a little fun, so I'm gonna mark that as a seam. I will set the entire down bottom to a seam because I don't really need that to have a flap. Click. And I am actually going to show you a little something else. Alt shift click, right click, mark as a seam. There we go. Now I've done everything as a seam. It's pretty standard. I will tap 3 to go into face mode, A to select all, bring my cursor into my UV editor section, tap A for all, and then right click and unwrap. Remember, this works out pretty well if you have created seams. If you haven't created seams, it doesn't work this nicely. I'm going to go into my island mode by selecting this and then select that object, tap S to scale it. Okay. Now, I do want to see how, let's see, do I need to do anything else? Let me select everything, pack islands. I don't want to rotate, but I do want to scale. And I will set my margin to 0.1. I just think that works. And pack it. There we go. Now we've got some nice big things. I guess if I did, no, I don't think I want to rotate. I think I want to keep it as it is. So the next thing I want to do is just see what the material looks like. So I'm going to make sure I actually have a material on my low poly. And I will call this obby matte. There we go. And it can be just regular, that's fine. I'm going to look at the shader editor here. I'm going to turn the top one into an image editor. I'm going to create a new checkerboard. And I'm going to do the color grid and say new image. And then I'm just going to drag from the little image icon down into the shader, and in my solid shading view, I'm going to click the drop down of the view modes and set it to texture so I can see it. And I want to show you that there's some really annoying stuff happening here, and that's because of, let's see, it's just how the, let's check it out, how the subdivision surface works with this material. And so the easiest way to do it, like I could show you something. If I hit Control R and went here, like this is a way of, well, that's not actually doing what I thought it would do, which is totally fine. This is how we fix it, is we select the object here, we go to our material, we click on subdivision surface, we roll it out. It does have a UV smoothing. It wants to keep boundaries. Boundaries are kept sharp, but I actually want to keep the corners. And you'll notice it now has fixed that. In terms of what's actually going on, I would love to find out. In any case, keep corners seems to work. Just try. If it doesn't work, try the other ones. See if other ones work better. They're just slightly different ways of doing this. Now, actually, this is going to be a little bit awkward if I Control R and add a little bit here. That does straighten it out. So that's nice. Keep corners. Use creases. I don't have creases, so it doesn't really matter. But there we fixed it by just changing the UV smoothing. Okay. Now I've got my unwrapped. Whoops. Hit Tab A just to make sure. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. A. Yep, everything is unwrapped. That's fine. Hit Tab. Export this out as our low poly. And I'm going to call it obio2lp. I'm going to keep selected objects. And again, for Unreal Engine, I do want to set smoothing to face, and then we won't get that weird error. I can almost put Blender away. I am going to save this as an incremental so that it's obelisk 08. And I'm going to go into Painter, and I'm going to create a new setup with a PBR thing. I'm going to look for my Obby2 low poly. I'm going to set this to 2K. And I'm not going to auto unwrap because I worked hard on my unwrapping, as you just saw. You should see your unwrap here, and there's your 3D object here. Now, we don't see any of our details, and that's good. So, I don't know, we can throw on... Do we want to throw something on? I want to look for bronze. Let's look for copper. Copper, red, bleached. I don't know. Let's do that. No, you know what? I'm going to get rid of that. I want copper in the overall, and then I'll use bleached on the inside, or maybe bronze on the inside. We'll see. But we need to bake our details. So, like, this is the most boring thing ever. Let's go ahead and bake our details by going into the bake section by clicking our croissant or tapping F8. Now, we do need to load our high poly. Let's change the output size to 2K. Let's go down to high definition meshes and click the little notepad and find Obby2 HP. There it is. Now we do have a little protrusion there. Oops, that's right. What's wrong? Why does my protrusion look bad? It looks like it's inside out. Okay. Well, what's going to happen if I continue to use this? I'm just going to bake it right now. Something bad is happening with those protrusions. And if I return to painting mode, like, where'd they go? These look like grooves. These don't look like protrusions. And the reason is I set us up to fail in Blender. I'm going to turn off my obby, low poly, turn on my high poly. I am going to turn on an overlay, whoops, of face orientation. And what happened was the objects that I'm using for my cube is actually scaled. Oh, it's scaled 1:1. But what happens is if it's red, that means that it's inside out, okay? And so what I need to do is rearrange those. And if I hit tab to go into edit mode, notice I have access to this. I'm going to tap L to select, whoops, is that going to work? Nope. Okay, fine. I will tap 3 to go into face mode and A to select all. And all I need to do is change the mesh normals. So I'm going to go to mesh, normals, and I'm going to recalculate outside, and that's going to recalculate every single mesh to be an outside. Boom. There we go. Now these are outside. Oh, I still have an ugly thing going on here. I need to drag my Boolean above my bevel. That way my bevel can take care of that hardened normals aspect. Okay. Now that looks good. I mean, essentially what I'm doing is, I think I can show you here. If I click mesh, recalculate normals to inside. Okay. That might be fun to try out. That means when this is going to become a hole because the face is flipped around in the opposite direction. If I were to actually export this as my high poly, actually I wonder if that's even going to work. I'm going to do it on my low poly, so let me hit Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. There we go. I will export this as my high poly. The cool thing is I just need to save over it. And then in Painter, it updates my mesh right away. So now we can see that high poly mesh actually has those bumps. That's really nice. But if I were to update my low poly, right? So let me hide this, unhide this. If I were to just select this, I'm going to, whoops. Really? Oh, okay. I'm going to select these two things, and I'm going to click Mesh, Normals, Recalculate Inside. And I'm going to hit Tab now, go into Object Mode, and export this back out. You'll see what happens when the faces are red. Let's come back in here. Let's look at our painting. Now, when we do it for the low poly, we do have to actually re-import our mesh by clicking Edit, Re-import Mesh. And so now you can see we have a hole in there. And if we were to export this to Unreal Engine, notice actually we can't see anything else because the opposite side of this is nothing, right? So we'd actually, yeah, it's not cool. And actually to make it make even more sense, let me go ahead and come back here, hit Tab, hit A, click Mesh, Normals, Recalculate Inside. So now everything is inside out. And if I hit Tab, Export, FBX, and do low poly, and come back to Substance and recalculate, now everything is going to be flipped, so it's going to look like we're looking at it inside out. If you ever see anything like that, like this is kind of cool for some orthographic games, right? If you ever need to make an orthographic game and you need the environment to be inside out, right? That's what you can do. It's kind of cool, but we don't want that. So let me go ahead, tab, select all, mesh, normals, recalculate outside. The reason why I don't use flip, which you could, is because sometimes there's like a random face that's not actually flipped incorrectly, and if you choose flip, it flips everything. So that's why I typically just choose recalculate outside, because then it makes everything face the outside. Okay, that was a lot of talk about normals and flipping. Let's export that low poly. Let's come back here and let's re-import mesh. Okay, awesome. Now it's all facing the proper way. We do need to rebake this though. Now that we have actual 3D geometry, we can go to bake. We can make sure our cage is big enough. Great. And let's bake those textures. We should be able to see these. Looks pretty good, I think. It'll show you the wrong mesh, and then it'll show you the right mesh. There we go. That's a little nice. I kind of like it. Okay. And the circles don't look awful. Well, they look kind of bad. Okay. It's possible we could go and like set that up to 4K, and you can see what happens when we bake that. It's going to be a little bit nicer. It's going to take a longer time. There's twice as many pixels. In fact, I might even not want that, so just because it might be just too much. And notice we have a seam along our edge here. See, if we didn't have those seams there, it might have been a little bit nicer. Maybe just one seam, but whatever. I'm going to set this back to 2K. I just wanted to show you it slightly better. And I won't record this. Awesome. So now you know the next step, right? The next step was to say, well, I want this copper. I'm going to right-click the copper and add mask with color selection, right? It adds this little mask here. Down at the bottom under properties, I'm going to say pick color. It's using the image ID or the ID mask, and I'm going to pick, you know, whatever color is the obelisk. Okay. Now I might grab, In class I used gold. I don't know, maybe bronze would work better. So I'm going to do the same thing for bronze. I'm going to right click it, add mask with color selection, use the color picker, zoom in so I actually pick the right one. There we go. Is that good? I don't know. Maybe. I actually don't think that's a good idea. So I'm going to subtract the blue from the color selection, and instead I'm going to pick the white for the bronze. That might be nicer. For this one I want it a little bit smoother, so I will grab copper, just copper. And that's the one I'm going to right click, add mask with color selection, and pick those ones. Okay. That's kind of nice. And then here's where we typically do the thing where, you know what, let's save this as, what are we saving this? Obelisk 02. Sure. And this is where I'm going to only export the textures. And I'm going to find a nice spot. Actually, is this in downloads? No. I think it's in the documents SP 2025. And 3D modeling, I've got obelisk class, painter, FB exports, and I'll create a new folder called, I don't know, bronze glows. Cool, that's my folder. I'm going to make sure I set it to Unreal Engine 4 packed. And then export it. Great. It said it has an emissive. It actually didn't export the emissive, and I'm not too sure about what's going on there. But I want to show you another map that I need to export out. Now, I want all of this stuff exported out. And we're already using a mask that's essentially a black and white mask of these grooves, right? So I'm going to capitalize on that. I am going to find that. I think it's, which one is it? It's this one. It's the copper one. So I'm going to right click the copper and I'm going to export that mask to a file. And I'm going to go to obelisk class, painter, text ports, copper 01. Really? No, I must have done it to the wrong one. I did. I did it to the wrong one. So I'm going to just kind of capitalize on these naming conventions, Obby2, LP, Obby Matte Base Color, and I will call this emissive. Emissive mask. Emiss mask. And I want it to be too long. There, and I'll show you what that looks like. Ooh. That's what it looks like. And so you can see that this black and white material is what's being used as a mask, or this image is being used as a mask to tell Substance Painter which part of this model gets that bronze. Okay? All right. Now we're going to open up Unreal Engine and import everything. Alright, so I've opened up Unreal Engine after about 20 minutes, and I'm going to make a new folder just to make it easier for you to see what I'm doing. I'm going to call it Obby02. Typically, I would put my static mesh in the static mesh and the textures in the textures, but I want you to see everything all at once if you're watching this. So let's go ahead, right-click in this blank space, click Import into the game, and I'm going to find my mesh. Now, the mesh I'm going to use is from the exported one from Blender. Oh, why don't I see the one from Blender? That's odd. Did I have it from a different one? Maybe it's from... there it is. I shouldn't have some... Oh, dang. Oh, well. It's Obby2. That's the low poly. We are not going to import the high poly. I mean, the whole reason for making the high poly is to bake details onto the lower poly. So let's import that. And I only have one object, so I don't need to worry about combining meshes, but, you know, in the future, maybe I'll need to combine meshes, so I'll just do that. There it is. It came in with a material. Now this is the one from Blender, right? So it does actually come in with the material I called ObiMat. I might as well use this to create my real material. Okay, now I'm going to import my textures. And I did put them in a stupid one. I made 2 mistakes. Not only is it in the other one, but it's also in the FPX. Okay, and here's my 4 materials. Now, if you didn't care about the emissive thing, you don't have that black and white one. That's the one I made myself or exported from the bronze material layer. Now, I don't want to right-click and make a material with my base color because my Blender FBX came with a material. I'm just going to use that. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I don't need this parameter, so I am going to delete it, and I'm going to drag in all 4 of my maps that I just exported from Substance Painter, and I'm going to go ahead and set up my view material preview to work with the static mesh that is designed for this. Okay. And again, you do that by selecting any mesh, clicking the little brick in the material editor. Okay. Now, once I drag my RBG, there it is. You can see that's the unlidded, unlit, whatever colors of the material. Let's actually make this a little bit bigger, just for funsies. There we go. I hope that works. Or I hope that works for you, the viewer, if you are sitting through this. Let's go ahead and add our normals. And normal to normal. Looks a little nice. Now we can, this is called occlusion, roughness, metallic. So occlusion, and I don't think that does anything. Roughness, metallic. Yeah, wowzers, that's really metallic. I'm not too pleased with how metallic that is. So it's possible I will multiply this metallic by something like 0.6. I hope that works. I don't know if that's going to work. Yeah, it kind of works. The other thing I want to do, I'm just going to try this. I feel like I should be able to multiply. Well, let me actually look at my ambient occlusion. So I'm going to double click this. I actually don't know if my ambient occlusion, yeah, there's my ambient occlusion. This should have shading all throughout here. So I'm not sure why there's no shading showing up in my material. There's a couple things I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to multiply the ambient occlusion map by like 10 and drop it into the ambient occlusion and just see if that adds any shading. And it really doesn't. I'm not sure why it doesn't, so I'm going to drag it up here and just see if I can multiply the base color by that black and white map, right? And white is 1 and 0 is dark, right? Or 0 is black. No, oh my god. White is 1, black is 0. So this should just be like an overlay on top if we multiply it. And then add it to the base color. It should. That's how it should work. And it actually did. You'll notice down here, I'm going to uncheck this. Oops. Oops, set that to 1. Sorry. The moment I add, keep your eye on these little strands here. The moment I add my ambient occlusion map to this multiply, they do get darker, the shading gets darker, so it actually does work. I don't know why it didn't work in class. Don't know why it didn't work in class. What happens when I change the specular to 0, just out of curiosity? Can't remember. Yeah, nothing really. Okay, that's fine. I think that's all I need to do. Now, here's the fun part. How do we use this? Now we're going to get into emissiveness, okay? Now what we want to do is grab the... Well, let's take a look. Let's add all of this. Nope, wrong one. In the base color map, we want this color to be emissive, right? This color should be emissive. So, how do we do that? Well, that's exactly why we grabbed this map. Is because all those parts are white in this map that we want to be emissive. Awesome. And so, what we do is we multiply the base color by this. And what do we do with that? We're going to multiply this again, because what we ended up doing was saying, okay, everything that is black in the emissive map here is we won't see, but everything that's white we see through. So it's taking this entire thing and just saying we are only focusing on the parts that are white, and that's my bronze. And then I'm going to multiply that by a value, like 1, let's say. And then we're going to stick that into emissive. And it's going to be a light piece, okay? This is getting a little bit wacky, so I apologize for that. Let's see if we can scoot this out of the way. But we might want to set this up to 10. And if we set it up to 10, that really takes hold. It turns into a light source. And yeah. And then if we open up our static mesh, double click our low poly. Oh, it comes in with OBMat. Yeah, so it's ready to go. So if I drag OBMat into here, you can see, let me just scoot it over here. I want to give it some reflectivity. Yeah, and let's play from here. All right, so now we have our, we have our little obelisk that is actually adding as a light source. We could use that as a light source in our level. But we want to do something even cooler, okay? What if I want this to pulse glow, right? So let's make this pulse glow. And the way we do that, let's scoot this down, is I want this number to change, this multiply number. And so what we're going to do is we are going to get a node called time. And time is like the time of the game, okay? And it's going to have some outputs, right? And the other thing we're going to plug that into is a sine wave, okay? And what do you know about sine waves? Sine waves end up going between -1 and 1 in a little wave, right? That's what a sine wave is. Yeah, here's a sine wave. So like what's going to happen is that sine wave is going to constantly be changing value, okay? And the value is going to be changing. So like it's going to oscillate between 1 and -1 based on time. And that's why we're getting the time of the system and plugging it in. And whatever time, like no matter how long this goes, the sine output is always going to be a value between -1 and 1. That's how that works. Okay? Now, what are we going to do with this? Well, we actually want our value to go between 0 and something. And so if our sine wave is at -1, I actually don't want that to happen. I want that to be up. So what we need to do is just boost this sine wave up by 1 unit. And how do you make something more positive by 1 unit? Well, that's just like adding 1 to it. So we are going to take whatever output this is, and we're going to add plus, type plus, and we're going to add 1. And so if the sine wave, if it should be at -1 if it's at 0, what is it when it's at 1? It's going to bump up to 2. And if I want to oscillate between 0 and 10, we're going to multiply this. Oops, not 8. Multiply by 5. Okay, so if the sine wave is at 0 and you multiply by 5, it equals 0. If the sine wave is at 2 and you multiply by 5, it equals 10. So that's how I'm going to make that multiplication oscillate over time. And what you'll see now, I believe, is that this now oscillates over time. Now, I might want to change that multiplication. I don't want it to happen over... oh, goodness. I don't want that to happen over a period of like a second, so what I'm probably going to be doing is changing that period to 10. And that just slows down... It slows it down, and it keeps going. Maybe 5. It is on for a little bit too much. I'd probably change this sine a little bit. I wonder if there's a different wavelength. Is it cosine? Would cosine work as well? Let's try cosine. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same thing. I know, you're going to say, Hegney, cosine is the opposite of sine. Of course it's the same thing. Yes, I know. Okay. Typically, people do work with sine more often. Let's go ahead and do that. In any case, now we've got this in our world, or we've got this going in the material, and we can check it out. We can play from here. And you can see how that affects the world. So cool, isn't it? Actually, I did the same thing over here earlier. It's also the same thing. You can see here, I didn't change the subdivision surface modifier here, so it's all wacky, and that's where changing how the subdivision surface modifier wraps around with the UVs actually helps. So wild, I love it. Oh my god, I love this. It's so nice. Okay, I hope this was fun. Again, I kind of went over everything we did in class and a little bit more, because after class I was like, I want to make it pulse, and so I just figured out how to do that. Bye, everyone.